Welcome in to the Late Night Gamecock Show. I am your host, Matt Anderson. And joining me, as always, is Alex Jones of thebigspur.com. Alex, how you doing tonight, bud?
Doing good. I hope everybody out there is doing good. We got a few things to get to tonight. Got some basketball news. Got some football official visits coming up. Big camp tomorrow is going to be a really big camp, and so it should be a whole lot to talk about tonight.
Yeah, and starting out, Alex, we're 1 week away from the NBA draft. So that means next week, I got to check the Chief Sports Network schedule. I'm planning to do a show, but I just don't know what the company wants to do yet. So I need to talk to those folks. I know that starting the 20th, they're taking a little bit of a break. So don't know if we'll be in the air or not, but if we are, we'll be on live during the NBA draft. And depending on when Colin Murray Boyles goes, we'll get to see him as a group walk across that stage, put on that NBA team logo hat, shake Adam Silver's hand. He got a green room invite. I don't think he was one of the first guys to get a green room invite, but maybe some folks didn't feel confident in their NBA draft projection, and so now he has been invited to the green room. You know, Alex, sometimes you see a kid slide that gets invited to the draft in the green room, but it's not often. I can probably think of 4 or 5.
I feel like you probably see that happen more in the NFL than the NBA. I bet the NBA is just you're a little more sure of where things are going to land in the NBA than you are in potentially in the NFL.
And the NBA seems to have more trades, I feel like, where there might be you might not hear about the trade to the 22nd pick, but it could be, this team has traded the rights to Colin Murray Boyles.
Yeah.
And, an additional future first or something like that. So a lot of trades, but I think for him going, it's something that was very important to him. He wanted to go in the lottery. He wanted to walk across the stage, and just I'm so happy for him. And this for the university, Alex. There's the last person I think that walked across the stage in the first round was Ronaldo Balkman. I don't think there's anybody since Ronaldo.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you'll get another guy in the NBA right now. You have Gigi Jackson, who had a pretty good rookie year 2 years ago and battled some injuries this past year. AJ Lawson really came onto the scene here with the Raptors kind of late in the season. The team wasn't good, but he had an opportunity there and made the most of it and got converted from a two-way contract to a normal 2-year contract. So the more guys you get in the NBA, the better, just from a recruiting standpoint. But also think about it, with the Murray Bulls and Gigi Jackson part of it being that the two in-state guys that are going to be in the NBA. So that's going to help, especially with some of these guys that South Carolina has, the state of South Carolina has, coming down the line in some of these recruiting classes coming up. It's, the more you get in the NBA, the better. And I think, and obviously Colin Murray Bulls, seems like when you look at the most recent mocks, it's kind of going to be in that 10 to 15 range potentially in the draft. So there's going to be a lot of exposure for South Carolina. He's got a chance to have a really good NBA career.
And as far as I know, I do expect Lamont Paris to be at the NBA draft. That's something that Colin has asked, and Lamont has said yes. But you never know with travel and all that and everything. But I do believe Lamont Paris will be there, and that's huge for the Gamecocks. It's huge to have Lamont Paris on 4 different channels. They're probably going to be showing the NBA draft between NBA TV, ESPN, ABC, and the different streaming services. So that's exciting. Before we get to some more basketball notes, I'm going to let Alex handle the men's side. But Alex, it's crazy. I feel like basketball, like your opponents way earlier in conference than you do with football. Like football takes like the longest period of time. I mean, not this year because we know they did like a 2-year trial run of saying, okay, these are going to be the home and away matchups. But it just seems like it comes out like right before SEC football media day every year. And now we're still pretty far away from SEC basketball for the men's and women's media days. But the SEC opponents have been revealed. The home games are Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Georgia, and Missouri. So off the cuff, that the Lady Gamecocks the women's team are going to play some challenging non-conference opponents. Alex, you might know more about that than I do at this point. Normally UConn's on the schedule, and Notre Dame's on the schedule, and Stanford's on the schedule. Yeah. But just looking at real quick, Texas, Tennessee, big-time home games. And on the road, they travel to LSU, which a lot of LSU fans think it's a rivalry. I think that Dawn Staley and her coaching staff would disagree. It doesn't seem to be a rivalry. And I feel like either last time or the time before they played, the Bayou Bengals, the LSU coach decided to complain about the amount of talent that was on the South Carolina team. But you do have road games at LSU, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Auburn, Florida, Texas A&M, and Alabama. So another, challenging schedule, but it's becoming more and more where South Carolina plays the challenging part of their women's schedule in the non-con, and then 3 or 4 games in the SEC.
Yeah, with the way they schedule the non-conference that you kind of mentioned off the top, they're like they play UConn every year. I mean, they're going to be playing a whole bunch of the top teams in the country, and as you kind of talked about last year, going into the NCAA tournament, the way they schedule the non-con, it really gets them ready for SEC play, where they're tested and battle tested really early on, and then they're even more ready once they get into the SEC from playing in LSU or playing at Texas or an Alabama who's in the NCAA tournament last year. Like those teams get them ready for the NCAA tournament. That's something that helps them kind of down, into once they get into the tournament and start making their run. So it seems like, from a schedule wise, it's going to be just as difficult as it normally is every year, but we've seen that pay off for them.
It's unbelievable, Alex, because I remember years ago you had the mid-February bracket busters where you had all of the non-Power 5 teams in men's college basketball. They wanted to play against another elite team. And sometimes like those games were like playing for this day, but you didn't know who your opponent was because they wanted to see how the teams performed. And then it was just like, look, we are not getting challenged in our league, so we need to find somebody else before we go to the NCAA tournament. And crazy enough, you look at Dawn Staley's SEC record, she's making the SEC look like the WCC does for Gonzaga men's basketball or St. Mary's men's basketball. But Alex, I know that on the men's side, there's been some reports today, some national reports that there's going to be, from what I understand, potentially an exhibition game against NC State in Greensboro. They played NC State last year in a secret scrimmage. I don't know if there are going to be any more secret scrimmages going on. They might have a couple, but trying to generate revenue and generate fan support and getting folks excited for the college basketball season, then they're going to do that. And then they have the Greenbrier, and then they have the men's SEC opponents, not the dates necessarily, but the opponents revealed. So, Alex, you want to run us through that real quick?
Yeah, so today the SEC released the home and away opponents. The women were yesterday, the men were today. So for South Carolina on the men's side, the home and away teams they'll play twice are going to be Florida, Georgia, and LSU. The only home game or the home games they're going to get are Florida, Georgia, LSU, then Kentucky, Mississippi State, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. And away, the teams that only play on the road will be Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Ole Miss, Texas, and A&M. And kind of off the bat, when I saw that today, you kind of look at it like that road schedule is going to be pretty brutal from when you look at it like that. That's going to be like they're going to have to play really good basketball at home because I think they have some opportunities at home. And I say that we're still a long way from learning about these teams. And I wonder I think the SEC is going to be good again this year, but maybe not to the level it was last year because last year every team was old. Every team was good. Mm-hmm. I mean, like the SEC last year was just another level, like unreal. I think it's going to be good again this year, maybe just not quite to that level. But to the point, I think with South Carolina, like you get Georgia and LSU twice, which I think, you feel okay about that. Florida obviously playing home away to defend the national champions. That's not going to be easy. But just that road schedule playing Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, like those are NCAA tournament teams. So it's never easy in the SEC, but that road schedule was something that definitely popped out to me.
It's funny, Alex, before you get to the Greenbrier tip-off, I looked at it and I was like, did they pick the furthest road trips for South Carolina this year? I mean, you're going to Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Ole Miss, Texas, and Texas A&M. And then I thought about it, and I was like, that's just college sports right now.
Yeah.
The geographic landscape and all of those teams except for Texas, and Texas A&M were all a part of the conference outside of Texas when the Gamecocks joined. But I don't know why. I think I was listening to something today, and it was like the ACC is traveling across the country. The Big Ten's traveling across the country. I was like, well, dadgummit, South Carolina is too.
Yeah. I mean, think you got to go to Missouri or like, and I'm not, and not maybe not this year, but like go to Missouri. Like, I mean, those Texas trips, like you're going to like pretty much the farthest schools, and that's just college basketball now. I mean, think about it in the Big Ten. Like you go, Southern Cal's got to go to Rutgers or vice versa, or whatever it may be. Like it's Clemson, crazy Stanford. That with alignment, realignment, all that, that's nuts. But especially when you think about it from, not to get off on a whole tangent about this, but football is just a little bit different just because it's played on a Saturday, but. With think about it from if Rutgers had to go play Southern Cal on a Tuesday night, I mean you're going to be missing days of school because of that, or a few days probably just from a travel standpoint. But not to go off too much on a tangent about
the other thing I was going to say is there's going to be some back-to-back road games. There always is. So, I mean, you're looking at, it might be a Texas and Texas A&M type road week. And Texas A&M and Texas aren't, Texas is a big state. I don't know how many miles it is, but it's not like, going to Athens. So I really do hope that they're able to mix that up, and maybe you play a Texas A&M on the road or a Texas, and then you have Georgia at home on the weekend. And then you go, when you play Georgia on the road, maybe you have that Florida home game, something like that, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, the Greenbrier, Alex, let's get to that, and then we'll get to the rest of the show, and we'll kick it off. It's going to be a lot of football, y'all. A lot of football. We're trying to get this out of the way.
Yeah, so just, today for the Big Spur, I kind of compiled some of the reports that are out there about what the non-conference schedule looks like for South Carolina. And I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, Rocco Miller, who kind of does some of the schedule and stuff, reported that South Carolina is going to open the season against North Carolina A&T on November 3rd. I think it's going to be the second meeting between those two. And so we'll kind of dive into some of these teams later on down the road. But that's one game. Then obviously the Greenbrier tip-off, I think, was announced yesterday. South Carolina's known they're going to be in this, but the actual matchups were announced. And on November 21st, Carolina's going to take on Butler, whose head coach is Thad Matta. And then on November 23rd, they're going to take on Northwestern, who's kind of been kind of a little bit of an up and down team, but they've been one that Chris Collins has had them in the tournament every now and then these past few years. And then just a few more, like Virginia Tech for the third straight season. South Carolina's going to be playing Virginia Tech. South Carolina, and this is part of the ACC SEC Challenge. South Carolina's going to be hosting Virginia Tech. They played Virginia Tech 2 years ago in Charlotte at the Spectrum Center, beat them by 2, I think. And then last year down in the Fort Myers tip-off, beat them by 10, 70-60. And this year they'll get them at home. And South Carolina, in the ACC SEC Challenge under Lamont Paris is 2-0. They've been good. They beat Notre Dame that first year, and then last year went to Boston College and beat the Eagles. So it's one that they've done well there. And then Virginia Tech's going to be an interesting team to watch this year just because they had a little bit of a down year last year as well. And just kind of the last quick little note, according to D1 Docket that tracks all the schedules, they right now have Clemson, the South Carolina Clemson game being played on December 16th. So that's obviously going to be at Little John Coliseum. And so it's just a few interesting notes. And obviously you mentioned the NC State exhibition matchup that John Rothstein had said as being finalized in agreement. So just a few little quick notes on the men's basketball schedule. And, this next month or so, that will continue to be finalized and some more games will start to come out.
Alex, I can almost guarantee you that if it's December 16th, then Clemson's last day of exams are going to be December 16th. It's going to be like a 9 p.m. tip-off. All the kids are going to go home the next day. But if it was South Carolina, it would be scheduled for December 22nd, right before Christmas when nobody's there. But that's an argument and a frustration for another day. Really quick, what Alex and I are going to go through on the rest of the show is Alex and I have compiled our projected depth chart, and then other players we think will contribute. It's not always going to be the starting 22, but people we think can flash or fill in if there's a need. And Alex is going to give us a preview of the weekend's big official visit schedule. Probably some unofficials as well. Alex will tell you who you can talk about. There might be a couple guys that they try and sneak in there. So make sure you're plugged into thebigspur.com. Obviously, the big news, Landon Duckworth's going to be in town, and we'll talk all about all of that in just a moment. But Alex, let's hit that intro.
Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of thebigspur.com.
Welcome back into the show. It again is June 18th. I'm excited to be here. I say it every freaking episode, but I cannot believe that, we're only a couple weeks away from the 4th of July. It's unbelievable. Off the top here, before we get into a lot of football stuff, did want to mention one thing I saw was funny, Alex. Things you can buy for $8 million. 32 Ferraris, a private island in the Caribbean, 16,000 PlayStation 5s, which if you're buying those, Alex wants one. Yeah. 1,000 acres of farmland in Kansas, 1.6 million Chick-fil-A sandwiches, 2 original Andy Warhol paintings, but you can't buy Lenore Sellers. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Then again, this Saturday at CV18 in 5 Points from, I think it's 4 to 8 p.m. It's a free event. You can RSVP. There's links you can find everywhere. Just type in South Carolina Wing Eating Contest 2025. It's going to be a really fun event. There's going to be a lot of coaches that are there from around the programs, head coaches, assistant coaches. Ashley Chastain Woodard is going to be the main event. It's going to be a good time. They're going to have door prizes, music. It's family friendly, so you don't have to worry about a bunch of drunks ruin it for everybody. Opportunities to interact with players, a wing eating competition with South Carolina student athletes. And then I think on top of that, there was one other thing. I can't remember what it was now. Oh, all the money goes to the Diamond Fund. If you have not heard about the Diamond Fund, it's a first for the University of South Carolina. All of the proceeds for this event are going to go to the Softball Booster Club. So everyone that enjoyed softball this past year, it's going to be an amazing opportunity to contribute to softball, which is something you probably never thought you would ever contribute to. Because it's just not promoted, and it's not promoted throughout the country. But going to be a really good time. Ashley Chastain Woodard is a phenomenal person. I am going to be there. JC Sherbert is going to be there. I'm sure. I don't know if JB is going to be there or not, but there's going to be a handful of folks from the Big Spur staff, and it's going to be a really good time. I'm really excited to go. It's my first time every year. It just hasn't worked in my calendar. And Alex might be there. He's got to figure out if he's going to be in Columbia or not. But yeah, so make sure you head over there. Saturday, if you stay for a couple minutes, it should be a really good time. Moving on, Alex, you and I went through our projected starting depth chart. Not really the depth chart, but the starters. So at quarterback, I think we don't have to talk too much about this. Lenore Sellers, the $8 million man. Running back, this was where it got a little interesting for me and Alex. We think it'll be Rashad Faison, but he does have to get clearance from the NCAA. If not, we think maybe Matthew Fuller. I think Matthew Fuller probably has the most overall potential long-term of all the running backs. Jawan Howard's a good kid. We'll talk about him later. Oscar Attaway's there. He's steady, but I don't know if Attaway will start. Alex, any update you've heard on Faison, and if you disagree at all with me on running backs after we did this like 2 weeks ago? So some stuff's changed.
Yeah, no update on Faison right now. It's obviously, I think it's one of those where they want to speed this process up just in case if he's ruled ineligible, they want to have. Obviously, they got Isaiah Augusta, the Colorado running back transfer this past week, and that wasn't because of they know what's going to happen. That was just a guy that was in the transfer portal. That was a pretty. I mean, if that guy's in the portal, you take him, and if Faison's eligible, that gives you 5 running backs, which is kind of the number you want. And if Faison does not end up being eligible, that still kind of covers you a little bit, gives you that 4th back in there. But and to that point, I know you mentioned Fuller, and they're maybe don't sleep on Jawan Howell. I really liked what I saw from him for the most part last year when he got in. I thought in those games he got in, he showed how explosive he can be. I think it's just now for both of those guys, really him and Fuller, they're going to be in their second years in the program, kind of understand more what it takes to be an SEC back, and had a guy like Rocket Sanders learn from last year. Oscar Attaway learned from him as well. So I think both of those guys could be in there. And don't discount Oscar Attaway too. I think he's got the chance to be pretty good for the Southcon this year.
I think so too. I think that running back room, you've heard about the camaraderie in quarterbacks, and it's been real. Yeah, have there been some transfers, but that's just the nature of the beast. I can tell you that the running back room at South Carolina is very tight. They're all pulling for one another. There's no egos, and it's all just when my number's called, I'm going to run as far as I can with the football, make as many people miss as I can. Wide receiver, Alex, until someone tells me other than this, I think that if the 3 wide receivers that are going to start, I think you can pencil or actually write in Sharpie Nick Harbor. I think he's going to be a definite starter. You got Brown coming back, Jared Brown. He's shown flashes. I think that right now he's a starter, and then I think Mazio is a starter. But Mazio, he was really good as a freshman. I thought he was really good as a freshman, and you got to take that sophomore leap. But I think of any of the jobs that are kind of up for grabs right now, I think it would be Brown's job. Your take on that?
Yeah, that's I think that would be kind of the way I lean. But Jared Brown, he was one that if he was healthy for last year, I think he would have made even more of an impact than he did. Like, you saw some of the flashes for him. You saw that screen pass that he took, down the field against Missouri for a touchdown. Like, Mike, I think we mentioned this a few times talking about him. Like, Mike Furry kind of mentioned in his spring press conference about how, Jared Brown's just continued to become an overall better just improving at wide receiver. And kind of being that when he was at Coastal Carolina, there was time that he was kind of like that gadget type of wide receiver that come in motion, kind of, uses a decoy type of thing. I think last year just learned to be a better overall receiver. And kind of with that whole receiver room as a whole, like, I think a lot of the talk in spring was about those freshman receivers and what they were able to do. But you also heard good things about what the returning receivers were able to improve on. Like you mentioned, it, Mazio Bennett was really solid his freshman year, and I think continued to get better. Nick Harbour, you saw the lights starting to come on there right towards the end of the season, and he had the whole spring to focus on football instead of track. And so I just think those returners don't need to be forgotten about for what they could bring to the table this year. And then you got those freshmen where they're all, the freshmen and the returners are all helping each other in practice every day, continue to get better. So, from a freshman standpoint, I think that the names you think about are Brian Rowe and Donovan Murphy, who could, or Malik Clark, maybe, who could work their way into the starting lineup. But, I wouldn't, discredit anybody. I would lean towards the veterans as we sit here today. And for the most part, that doesn't matter just because they rotate so much, but just from a starting standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that Alex is right on it there. Alex, I do think that you probably have 6 to 8 guys that you feel confident about. And we'll see. We'll see how Murph translates. Malik Clark's already flashed. You mentioned Brian Rowe. Clearly, if you've been on the Big Spur, you've seen all that. So I think they're going to have 6 to 8 guys. We didn't even talk about Dre Jacobs. We can talk about him a little bit later. But I feel better about the wide receiver position than, like, from top to bottom. I don't know if there's going to be an alpha this year. I think there will be an alpha next year. Just throwing that out there. But Lenore spreads the ball around. Tight end, we both agree Michael Smith is going to be the starter there. Offensive line, we'll have a little bit of conversation here. Josiah Thomas and Penn, left tackle. I think Kason Henry, right tackle, you can put him in Penn. And then the interior of the line is where the questions are. Right now, and we'll talk about some other guys that can contribute there, but right now I think you're going to see Big Tree, Babalade at left guard, Boaz Stanley at center, and then right guard, Trevon Ball is how I would pencil it in. I think preferably that's what the coaching staff would like, because you do have 2 freshman All-Americans at guard, redshirted last year. You have a guy that's played over 100 games on the offensive line, granted at a lower level, and Boaz Stanley. And then Josiah Thompson, as long as he's healthy, he's going to be a first-round NFL draft pick. And then Kason Henry, everyone raves about him. But he's had the injury bug too. So do you disagree? Like, if everyone's 100% healthy, Alex, that's what I'm asking right now. And then we'll come back to the guys that contribute. Do you think that's your 5?
Oh, man, it's tough because it's a good tough thing for South Carolina, just because they have so many different options they can go to in those interior spots, and really just about every spot on the offensive line with the way they've recruited. Tree, I think, would be really intriguing at left guard. I think that'd be a really intriguing left side of the offensive line. Is that what they decided to do? Like, or maybe he slides to a tackle spot, but I'm not sure. Boaz Stanley, I think you can feel pretty pretty good about him being the center right now, coming out of spring practice and into the summer workouts. Like, I think he kind of really solidified himself there, and is still being pushed by some of those other guys in that room too. And really, that right guard spot, like, I kind of wonder with both Tree and Trevon if both of those guys are going to be just too good to keep off the field. I think you saw 2 years ago when they came in, like, they flashed and had really good moments. Tree was the National Freshman of the Week by 24/7 Sports after what he did against Georgia, and Trevon was recognized by Pro Football Focus as a freshman All-American. So it's there, and I think now that they have 2 years under their belt, like, could they be in line to start? Like, maybe. No, I think it's still. That's going to be something that's one of the big key questions in preseason practice when that gets underway, is how that offensive line shakes out. And not to jump to our other segment here of some other guys to keep an eye on, but Shed Surratt could really be one to keep an eye on. I think he had a really good spring coming in his first spring with South Carolina. Keep an eye on him. Nick Sharp could be a guy to watch for one of those guard spots. Marquis Anderson's, he could be one to watch. He got some work, also a little bit of work at center just for a backup option there, because Ryan Brubaker is going to be out for the season. And so I think it's just really interesting to see because there's so many different options they can turn to. Really most of those offensive line spots, and they've built depth on that roster just so they don't have what happens 2 years ago with all those injuries just kind of decimate the offensive line.
Well, I think on top of that, Alex, I say put somebody in Sharpie, and I feel very, 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 very 99.9999999% sure that Josiah Thompson is going to be the starting left tackle, pending something happening. The rest of it, though, like no one's been promised anything. You might feel confident because you're Casey Henry and you won the job last year, or you're a Trevon Bowe or a Big Tree who had accolades as a freshman, but they brought in guys, and they brought in guys with experience.
Yeah,
and Marky Anderson, I feel bad for him. He hasn't really shooken the injury bug, but they brought folks in. So we'll see. We'll talk about more of these guys. We probably won't hit too much of the O-line later, but moving on to defense. Okay, 100%. Sharpie, gold, italic font, underlined, sans script. We all know who it is. Dylan Stewart is going to be starting defensive end. I felt like we had a little bit of back and forth here, or maybe our thoughts were thinking, a lot of options. I think that the best option today is Nick Barrett Jr. for the other defensive end. I think that he's proven himself enough, or Brian Thomas Jr. I don't know. I'm getting guys confused. Yeah. Alex looked at me like, checking my notes.
I wasn't sure which one wasn't sure if you're going Nick Barrett or if you're going Brian Thomas Jr.
I have it over here on my other screen, and Barrett's my starting defensive tackle, so spoiler alert. I have Brownlee Denley and then Nick Barrett, but Brian Thomas, I think he has the potential to be an animal. He is very, very good, and don't discount playing behind Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard. I know that everyone wants these 4-star defensive ends to come in and just be Jadeveon. Well, Dylan Stewart was. Don't forget about Devin Taylor, who took a couple years.
Yeah, I was on ITG today with JC and Phil, and I've said it a few times. Like Brian Thomas Jr., what he was able to accomplish last year from a stat standpoint, kind of gets overlooked because of a Dylan Stewart or Kyle Kennard. He had 6.5 tackles for loss, I think 4.5 sacks. Like it was quietly a really good year that he had when he came in there. And I think the key for him is like he's really good in obvious pass down situations, and I think really the key for most of those edges guys are just continue to get better in run defense. So obviously. I think that's something that each one of these guys can get better at. But Brian Thomas, like if I had to choose the starter today, I think I'd go him just because of what he's been able to do so far in his career.
I think you have to, honestly. I really do think you have to. All right, so I already told you Denley and Barrett. I think that Monkel Goodwine, we'll talk about him a little bit later, but I'm going to go Denley, Brownlow Denley and Barrett. Linebacker is kind of interesting to me because I have really only seen flashes of these two players that Alex and I kind of settled on. And that's Fred J.R. Johnson and then Justin Orcondu. I don't, or Wonkadu, whatever. I don't know. I think everything I hear about these kids is like future NFL picks. More athleticism the Gamecocks had last year. Now, there are reps that you have to have. And the reason that the linebackers were so good last year for South Carolina was because of a Dylan Stewart and a Kyle Kennard disrupting things and then reps and knowing what to do. And can these guys do it? It's another situation where don't discount guys just because you haven't seen them play. At some point, you haven't seen anybody play, and whether they're behind somebody or what, or the light just switches on. Melvin Ingram, prime example. Melvin freshman year, I know Melvin. I like Melvin a lot. I would tell this to Melvin's face, like, dude, you ain't never going to be anything because you don't care. And then the light flipped, the switch flipped, and he became a machine, number 18 pick in the draft. So, do you? Sean Murphy is another guy we'll talk about, but do you feel pretty confident with Fred and Justin as the starting linebackers as of today? It's a hard one.
Yeah, and just to emphasize too, like we're just guessing here on this is from a starting standpoint. This isn't based on anything we've heard. Like we're just putting together a complete guess of what we think could happen for the Virginia Tech game. But from a linebacker standpoint, like feel pretty good about Fred Johnson, but I think it could be like an or type of situation on the depth chart with Fred Johnson or Justin Okoronkwo or Sean Murphy. I think both of them bring different things to the table. Sean Murphy's maybe a little bit more experienced just from his time. I think he's going to be a redshirt junior. Like he's a little bit more experienced. But then Joshua Okoronkwo, like he really flashed, and both of those guys had really good springs too. So I think it could be just an or situation there. Like I don't think you go wrong with either there.
Yeah, and we get to the secondary now, Alex, and like you said, like this is spitballing bits and pieces of information and bits and pieces of film and bits and pieces of things we know, but at the same time, like I guarantee you this list is not going to be Shane's list. We might have a guy that's third team on Shane's list, but we don't know yet. Secondary, you got Judge Collier, Brandon Cisse. We think those are going to be the starting corners. I think that's pretty fair in my opinion. Then Nickelback, Jalen Kilgore, safety. I think you can pretty much put him in Sharpie, DQ Smith, and then Peyton Williams at the other safety. Alex, thoughts there?
Yeah, the secondary is really interesting because they have a lot of different options they can turn to. And, obviously the thing in spring was Jalen Kilgore. Pre-spring, the question was going to be, does he move back to that safety spot or does he stay at nickel? And for spring, he was at nickel, and I think they're confident keeping him there just because I think they like what they can have at that other safety spot with a Peyton Williams or a David Busey or, Zabari Sandy, whoever, one of those guys at safety. I think they feel pretty good there. But, the nickel spot is so important in Clayton White's defensive scheme and Jalen played it, perfectly last year. I mean, he had one of his best seasons, obviously, so far with I think it was 4 interceptions or 5 interceptions. Like he was really good, and was really good in run defense too. So, that nickel spot, I think you can feel pretty good about Jalen Kilgore being there. I think one corner spot with Judge Collier, I think you can feel pretty good there. That other one, it could be interesting just because that'd be a really interesting battle with those 3 guys with Vakari Swain, Judge Collier, and Brandon Cisse. Cisse's really good, and so is Swain. Like all 3 of those guys are really good, and
Jalewis Solomon's good too.
Yeah, like don't forget about him. Like he was. I think he learned a lot from that first year, that redshirt year, and we know he was in high school, a 2-way player that was a really good 2-way player that could do it all. Like that's why I'd say there's just so many different options. They have depth in that room, and I think one thing we've talked about it a few times is like what do they do in obvious pass down situations? Do they move a Jalen Kilgore back and bring in a whoever is not starting at that other cornerback spot, whether it be a Swain or a Brandon Cisse? But Brandon Cisse, like you see his stats and you watch his film from NC State, like maybe he's too good to keep off the field. Then at the same time, you can say the same thing about Vakari Swain. Like he really played well last year and kind of did it all, was good in coverage and really was willing to get and be physical and run defense. So it's really interesting to see how this secondary is going to turn out because I think the secondary overall has got a chance to be really good because they have so many good players and they're really depth. And don't forget about Kelvin Hunter, and I also mentioned David Busey, like that guy, like he keep an eye on him too. Like you saw him on kickoff team, like that guy's not scared to come in there and hit you really hard. Like you saw it on the Alabama kickoff return where he forced a fumble. Like I think he had a really good spring too. So really, really intriguing secondary because of there's so many different options they have.
I can't really add much to that, Alex. I do think that it'd be interesting. Vakari Swain, going through a spring practice, going through a summer, going through a season, obviously did not participate in the spring. And then you have a Cisse who's been a part of a different football team, but he's gone through 2 off seasons. He's gone through 2 spring practices. He's gone through 2 fall practices, 2 seasons. And, who's going to win out? And Torian Gray, I do believe he's the best secondary coach in the country. I firmly believe that. And I just, for Gamecock fans, hope that he's going to be a guy that just says, I want to be a lifer. I like South Carolina. I don't want to be a defensive coordinator necessarily unless it's the absolute right job. But definitely great. On special teams, we're not going to spend a lot of time here. But I do think that both of us agree that Mason Love is at this time going to be the punter and the place kicker.
Yeah, absolutely. If I had to guess today, that's what I go with.
Yeah, and then punt returner and kickoff returner. Kind of just real quick here, you got a lot of options at both. I think that you could see some of the freshmen pop in here, a Jaden Sellers, a Lex Cyrus, a Jalen Kilgore, a Nick Harbor. I mean, ideally, you want the person that has a chance to score when he touches the ball to be, as the returner, kick returner, punt returner. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if Nick Harbor is so valuable for your offense, you really don't want him back there. You don't want to do that. If you can, have a chance for a touchdown or have a chance for a big return, you play the field position game, right? So, but Lex Cyrus has wheels Jaden Sellers is fast as crap and has some wheels to him, some shiftiness. Lex Iris has some shiftiness. Maybe there's freshman play there. I wouldn't even be surprised if Donovan Murph is back there. I remember a couple of years ago, Alshon Jeffrey returned some kicks. Stephon Gilmore returned some kicks. You might just want your best athlete back there.
Yeah, that's a spot that maybe at the kick returner spot. Like, I think, Kilgore has been a pretty experienced punt returner. He's very solid, very sure-handed guy at that punt returner spot. I think that's something that you kind of lean towards there. But, those freshmen, the receivers, like, you wouldn't be surprised. A guy like Lex Sowers, I think he's and Jaden Sellers. Those two, I think, are kind of perfect fits for that kickoff return role or something in that. Or maybe they want Harbor back there just because of his game-breaking speed. But, I could see those two. Also could see Donovan Murph. But, I wouldn't be surprised if you see freshmen on special teams for South Carolina all the time, whether it be punt return or any other special teams spot. But really interested to see if those two freshmen I mentioned or Jared Brown or Amazio Bennett, somebody like that get in there, because they also have some other older veteran guys like I mentioned, Jared Brown, who could fit in that. Bakari Swain, Jalewis Solomon. Like Jalewis Solomon would be really interesting back there because of his speed and playmaking ability. You saw that in high school. Like it's a lot of different.
Malik Clark can fly.
Yeah, like we could sit here and probably name. You just go
Gidron can fly. Get an angle, and you don't have to be Nick Harwood to go the entire distance.
Yeah, they have a lot of. Joe DeCamillis has a lot of different options on his hand, and I think that's what spring practice and summer and preseason is going to be like. Who do you feel best about being back there to make sure? Because obviously the main goal is to hold on to the ball and be sure-handed with the ball to give your offense the ball, but who also could make some big plays in returning. Because I think last year that was something that maybe they didn't do as great at. Well, and like there had some opportunities for some returns, and they didn't really break a whole lot in there, but they were pretty sure-handed. Like Jalen Kilgore was really good back there being sure-handed. Like, I don't think they had really any turnovers off of special team stuff like that. So really interesting. Another question that's going to be had for preseason practice, but options are definitely there.
I agree, and the good thing is Alex and Hale will probably be there for the special teams part of practice until they get kicked out. So, maybe they'll be able to give you some nuggets and bits of wisdom. Some other guys I think they're going to make, a big play this year. I'm not going to get into the Aaron Nolans or the Cutter Woods just because I think that, obviously Air, I don't think you can get a red shirt out of him. So maybe he'll play because he redshirted last year. I think they'd love to redshirt Cutter Woods and maybe have him in Lenore Sellers' role where the game gets out of hand. But I think Luke Doty is going to have a role this year. I can't tell you what it is, and I'll go ahead and give you a free prediction, an extra one. I won't use it later in the summer when Alex and I start talking preseason, but I think Luke Doty scores 3+ touchdowns this year. So I think Doty's going to be in there. Already talked about the running backs. We already talked about Rowe and Murph. I think both of those guys make plays as a freshman, and I'm not ruling out either of them being a starter at some point in the season. Tight end, don't forget about Jordan Dingle, SEC experience. Sure-handed, kind of reminds me of a Justice Cunningham type tight end. I don't think he's going to take a top off a defense like you've seen in the past or run people over like you've seen in the past with last year. But offensive line, the guys that we didn't talk about were Newsome Jr. and Shivers. I do think that those guys can step in a pinch. And if they have to be starters by midseason because of injuries, offensive line's a tough position. I think they'll be okay. On defense, I'm just telling you guys, Anthony Addison is turning heads. He's a guy I'm sure they'd love to redshirt, but if he's just better, he's just better. Maddox, I see you in here, but Dre Jacobs as well, wide receiver. Like Alex and I said, I think you can go 6 to 8 guys that you can count on. We'll see who steps up. Dez Uzamalelu, I'm like terrible. Now it's just a bit, but with Dez, I think Devin Taylor is an underclassman, a guy that can disrupt some things on third downs. Devin Taylor was great behind Melvin Ingram, behind Jadavion. Defensive tackle, we talked about Monkel Goodwine. Keep an eye out for Xavion Hardy. He was a kid that was highly recruited, number one JUCO kid in the country. Probably just got to get used to the speed. Go ahead, Alex. Yeah,
throw another one in there, Troy Pikes. I think keep an eye on him. He's definitely one to watch. Like he's one that obviously you really love that he's got the multiple years of experience left, but he'd be one that they could get a lot out from this year. Like I said this again on ITG earlier today, like his stats don't tell the whole story from his time at Georgia Southern. Like, he was a whole lot better. Like, I think just kind of depends from a defensive tackle standpoint, like what the defensive scheme is, or, do offenses kind of, maybe double team more defensive tackles, but keep an eye on him. Like, he's one that I think, there's a reason Georgia and Ohio State brought him in for visits in the transfer portal, and he was as sought after as he was. So keep an eye on him.
Yeah. Another kid, we talked about Sean Murphy, a linebacker, Donovan Darden, a kid that I've seen in person a couple times now. Not at a high school game, but just been around him. A physically built kid, like how you draw up a linebacker. He looks like a defensive end, but he moves like a linebacker. He shot up recruiting rankings towards the end.
I wonder if he can play that Fred Johnson role this year. Fred Johnson was kind of, especially after Bengali Kamara transferred, like Fred was kind of that fourth guy off the bench who come in and eat 10 snaps for you to give a Debo Williams, Ben Martin, Scott, or Demetrius Knight a break. And I think you'll see how much that's going to pay off for Fred Johnson this year with what he was able to do. So I wonder if Darden, I think Darden could fit perfectly into that Fred Johnson type of role this year.
Yeah, I think so too. When you look at defensive back, I think Kendall Daniel Jr. is a kid that's going to he has a high ceiling, high floor, can be a freak. I'm not saying Nick Imamwari level freak because that's rare. There's only a handful of those guys that exist on planet Earth at one time. But Kendall Daniels is a kid that you hope that you can redshirt, but also get some reps this year. When you look at the returners, we already talked about some of them. Special teams, guys that just make tackles. Kelvin Hunter will knock your head off. Mm-hmm. David Busey is so fundamentally sound and likes to hit. Gerald Kilgore, I thought he was underrated last year on special teams when he played. And obviously Jalen's older brother. But really quick here, Quay Dodd. Look, Alex, if you want to hit that one, you can.
Yeah, I was just going to add to like a special team thing. Said earlier that freshmen always, as we all know, like freshmen play a big role in special teams, and like a few guys that I could see play in that David Busey type of role from last year be like a DeMarcus Leach or a Chris Hatfield. Like those two, I think could fit perfectly into a guy that you see on the kickoff team down there making plays constantly.
And those are two of Hale's favorites, by the way. He likes both of them a good bit. All right, so Quay Dodd, I think they'd like to redshirt him. He probably has. He has the build to be a defensive end, but if you can redshirt those guys, and John Strickland talks about it all the time. Anytime you talk to John, he's going to say like, "Look, defensive ends, defensive tackles, offensive linemen, you don't want to play as freshmen, and you might not want them to play as a sophomore, but that's how you build your factory. Is you get a guy like Quay Dodd in there, and you let him grow and let him mature." We're going to take a quick break. But before we do, I do want to tell Maddox. Maddox has been all over this tonight. Yeah. We appreciate you, Maddox. We're going to talk about the official visit list right now after this break. So we got you covered, my friend. Go ahead.
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. When I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia. Yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
Alex, after all of these D's Wings sponsor breaks, I've never asked you, do you like oysters?
I do not, no.
Oh, I love it. I can eat oysters in the half shell. I could eat 10 dozen of them.
I haven't had one in forever, but I don't think I remember being a fan of it.
I remember we'll get to recruiting, I promise you guys, but funny story. First time I think my wife ever had a raw oyster, it was New Year's Eve in Columbia, and it was like one of those firework nights, all that. Mm-hmm. And we got a hotel, stayed the weekend, and she went to the restroom and I ordered 2 oyster shooters from Pearls. And when she came back, it just looked like a drink. She couldn't tell. And I've never seen someone think she was going to, I thought she was going to throw up, but it was hilarious. So next time I'm with you, Alex, like make sure you look into the shot glass before you take a sip.
Yeah, for sure.
So Alex, looking at this big recruiting weekend, and this is one of the weekends that I look forward to from covering Gamecock athletics. It is the cookout. It's the big weekend. A lot of underclassmen will be here. I'm sure Hale is going to have an exhaustive list at some point, but you want to keep things under wraps a little bit. Alex, I'm just going to take you through the weekend official visitors. If you want to add anybody, go ahead. First off, defensive back Jasavion Currents is committed to South Carolina. I think Gamecocks feel great there. Offensive lineman, flirting with 5 stars, depending on what rating service you look at. Darius Gray. Where do the Gamecocks stand right now, and what do they need to do this weekend? And this can be for all the players.
Yeah, I think they're right in it with Darius Gray. Like, obviously, a lot of the talk out there is with LSU right now for Darius Gray, and he's one that, South Carolina's been after him. Like, I'm going to say the same thing for him and Samari Matthews. Like, they've been after both of these guys really for a long, long time. They've been targets for South Carolina for a long, long time, built relationships with each of the coaches. And I think, Darius Gray took a lot of official visits. I can't remember the exact number, but took a lot of them. And I think this weekend is key to get him in for this last weekend of official visits, just to kind of, I guess, if you're thinking from a South Carolina perspective, kind of remind Darius Gray like how long that coaching staff has been on recruiting him. And I think that's going to be one of the key pitches. And he'll obviously have a lot of attention from that coaching staff. He's a really good player, as you can see from his 5-star ranking. But South Carolina's going to have their shot this weekend to kind of, see if they can get the last word. And I don't think there's a exact commitment date or timeline for him yet. But a lot of these guys, and I don't know for Darius Gray, but for a lot of these guys, they want to get it done before their senior season.
Yeah, and I would say that with Darius Gray, he has a really good relationship with Lonnie Teasley. I think he's building that relationship with the LSU offensive line coach, but the LSU offensive line coach has accolades that Lonnie Teasley just doesn't have yet as far as getting people to the pros. So I think that's why it's mainly a South Carolina LSU battle right now. That never rule out the last second stuff I've told you. Nick Harbor, 3 different times throughout the night before National Signing Day, he was committed to either South Carolina or Oregon. So you never know. With Samari Matthews, I think it is telling that he did cancel his Clemson visit. Not going to make that Clemson trip. And for everyone talking about Samari and money, NIL plays a role in every single recruitment, every single one. I don't care if you're a 2-star. I don't care if you're a 3-star, 4, 5, whatever. But I do find it interesting that Clemson has been beating their chest about how their NIL and their rev share is going to be tops in the country. And for someone that's supposedly interested in NIL money, they got their visit canceled. So we'll see what happens with Samari. I think the Gamecocks are in a good spot. And as Maddox in the chat mentions, he is good friends with Jasavion Currents. Wide receiver, Samari and Wingo. Alex, what can you tell us about him?
Yeah, this is one where I think it's just they kind of take their shot this weekend. Like, obviously, it's big to get him in for the last official visit weekend, but I think with him coming into the visit, it's really kind of feels like a Miami and Florida battle, especially with those two being an in-state guy. He's from St. Augustine, Florida. Really good wide receiver, and I think they'll have their shot to kind of make their pitch this weekend. I think see what they can do to shoot up the board, but I'd say right now maybe a Miami Florida battle for him.
Yeah, and I think this is the prime example of like a moving day, if I can use my favorite analogy. Let's see if you can delay a decision. Let's see if you can get in the ball game for an official, something like that. Then you have safety in-state, Tamarian Watkins, a guy that I don't know if he's a 4-star on every site, but he's a really, really good player, very much in the Nick Imanwari type of trait set, if you want to say, and a kid that I think that people in the state that know high school football say this is a guy that needs to stay in state. So what's your take on Tamarion going into the visit?
Yeah, he's a really good player. Like, he's a guy that, first saw about probably a little bit more than a year ago at the Rock Hill Showcase last year. And he just, every time and really from then, his recruitment has blown up. Like, he came to the South Carolina camp and got an offer in this last summer. and it's really blown up. Like Georgia and Texas A&M have been really after him. He took official visits to both of those places and also went to Miami. But, I think going into this visit, South Carolina's in a really good spot. And he's one that, at his size, like every time I see him in person, I think he just gets bigger and bigger. And I kind of wonder, like, could he get big enough to be a linebacker? But at the same time, like, he doesn't lose his speed. Like, he can get east to west. Like, he has the speed and continues to get bigger. And I think he's really good. And South Carolina's in a really good spot here.
Yeah, I think so as well. Desmond Green is the offensive lineman, been around the program. It feels like I've been talking about him for 3 years. A kid that's very comfortable at South Carolina. A kid that at one point he told people close to him South Carolina is where he wanted to go. We'll see. When you're 15 years old, things can change. But what's your take on Desmond Green, Alex?
Yeah, it kind of, I feel like it may be in the same type of scenario as a Wingo. Like, South Carolina's going to have their shot this weekend, but I think Florida has some momentum in this recruitment. And, South Carolina's been in that kind of top group, I think, with Florida and Oklahoma and Georgia. And seems like right now Florida has a little bit of momentum here with Desmond Green. But again, he'll be in and they'll have their shot with him this weekend to kind of see what they can do. But it's going to be interesting to see how the whole offensive line class shakes out as a whole, and not to kind of get off here from the official visits, but obviously you got South Carolina has two commitments already in Zion Giles and Anthony Baxter. And now, you think about some of these guys they've had in, like, I think you feel good about where they are right now for JB Shabazz. He's going to Ohio State this weekend, so you continue to keep an eye on him. Kamari Blair, they made a really big impact on him. Now he's going to Tennessee, and that's an in-state school for him this weekend, so keep an eye on that as well. But it's really interesting to see what the numbers end up kind of shaking out here for this offensive line class, because they have some guys like, could it get to 3? Could it get to 4? Depending, obviously you got Darius Gray in this weekend too. So really going to be interesting to see what they can do for this offensive line class.
I think with offensive line, you want to take, and look, I just know this league. I think you want to take 5 to 7 offensive linemen and 5 to 7 defensive linemen every single class. And I think Georgia has the right method, especially along the defensive line, and even the way they recruit linebackers. You get them in, and in this era, you are a professional athlete. You process them out if they don't work, and that's better for them too. I'm not trying to be callous here, but I think you got to take at least 10 over those two positions, and that's roughly 40 to 45% of your recruiting class. Tight end Tilden Riley, he's a guy that I wouldn't be surprised if a decision's coming sooner than later. I think South Carolina's in a good spot. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. He's really intriguing player that's kind of emerged onto the recruiting radar pretty quickly. Like South Carolina offered, and then he's gotten some other offers: Vanderbilt, West Virginia, Virginia Tech, and he's one that I don't have his exact size up right now, but a really good size player at that tight end spot. And when you watch his film, like kind of just a playmaker for Orangeburg Prep playing for them. Like you can see him do a little bit of it all. He's got some good route running. He can go up and high point the ball at his size. Like really intriguing player. And Virginia Tech, is right there. And I think, they were one of his first offers, but I think South Carolina's in a really good spot. And, he also officially visited Vanderbilt this past week and then was supposed to go to West Virginia, but ended up canceling that visit. So I think going into this, South Carolina's in a good spot for him as well.
He reminds me a little bit of Nick Muse. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I see a little Nick Muse to him, but we're going to keep going here, y'all. We're not running away right quick, but we're going to go through these a little bit quicker. I'm kind of just quicklier. Is that even a word? Quicker. We're going to go through these a little quicker. Alex, I just want to review past official visits because summer is so important for recruiting and laying that groundwork. So I've coined the term moving day when you talk about these early June official visits. South Carolina has had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's that? Six players by my count that are commitments, either committed shortly after the visit or commitments going in, that have officially visited over the summer. Those guys are offensive lineman Anthony Baxter, defensive back KJ Johnson, Aiden and Andrew Harris, Zion Giles, and Keenan Britt. Let's just go from start to finish. So we'll start with May 30th, Alex. How do you feel about the Gamecocks and defensive tackle Pierre Dean?
Yeah, really interesting. Like he's done with official visits. He did South Carolina, Georgia, and Ohio State official visit. And I think I kind of sit still where I did with him going into the visit, that it can end up being a South Carolina Georgia battle, and just going to have to get over the family ties to Georgia with his brother playing there. But South Carolina also has played in their favor the proximity to home with him being from North Carolina. So going to be interesting one to track.
Carter Meadows, big time player.
Yeah, I think South Carolina's in it.
Defensive end Carter Meadows. For those of you who don't know.
Yeah. I think South Carolina's in it. Like they're right there. Like you also got Penn State, who's when you think about what these teams are selling for Carter Meadows, like South Carolina's going to be selling the DMV effect with South Carolina, and then Dylan Stewart, what they're able to do with him, and then Penn State, a team like that, they're going to sell the whole Abdul Carter being drafted as high as he was, and Ohio State's also in there too. So I think South Carolina's going to have a spot in this one all the way till the end. It's going to be interesting to watch how it all plays out.
The other blue chip guy that was in was Kari Adams, defensive back. I've seen some crystal balls come in for not South Carolina. You're taking feel on that recruitment right now. Yeah,
it seems like Notre Dame has some momentum here. He's going to Oregon this weekend, and when we talked about his visit preview and that May 30th visit, like I think it was Kari Adams. It was one of those where we said like kind of just take your shot and see how it goes. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a good visit, but I think it was maybe been a little bit of an uphill battle even going into that visit.
Yeah, I thought it was great for South Carolina to get him on campus, to be honest with you. And I think that is a positive trajectory for South Carolina because you would like to get Kari Adams on campus as an underclassman, not going into his senior year and build that relationship like it did with Dylan Stewart. Wide receiver Travis Johnson, I've seen some crystal balls. Looks like he might be going elsewhere. Yeah, I don't know how high he is on the board either, Alex. That's the other thing.
Yeah, Michigan seems to be trending with him. Like, I thought, South Carolina put themselves in a really good spot post-visit for him. And I think Michigan kind of, he was there this past weekend and it seems like they have a lot of momentum here.
You already talked about offensive tackle JB Shabazz. I really, really like the Gamecocks position. I'm not saying like if I had a crystal ball, it would be on South Carolina with the confidence of like 6. And I think I actually do have crystal balls. I just don't do them.
Yeah, I think South Carolina's, we talked about this before, like his interest, and kind of the mutual interest between the two, I think kind of flew under the radar until his official visit. And South Carolina made a pretty big impact on him. And I think, going into his visit this weekend, I think they're in a pretty good spot.
Then Maddox actually asked about this in the chat box. Amari Thomas, a Florida State commitment. From what I've gathered, it's Florida State or South Carolina. I don't think he's going to really consider other folks, but anytime there's an early commitment to another school, considering other teams, you're kind of weary of whatever happens the rest of the recruitment. But I do know that Florida State wants to keep him. Yeah,
I think South Carolina has a chance. Like, I think a week ago today, like he showed up to an FSU 7-on-7 camp with Carolina gloves on. So, I mean, that maybe a little bit, you don't want to read too much into that. But I think South Carolina has a shot. Now that he's from Bluntstown, which is right outside of Tallahassee. So, and he's going to Florida State for an official visit this weekend. So you have to imagine they're going to do everything they can to keep him. But, I think South Carolina's very much in this one.
I do too. And you had Carson Baker who committed somewhere else. He was a kid that the Gamecocks were tracking at running back. Maybe Amari Thomas just needs some love. Like, hey, I'm a hometown guy. Don't treat me like a hometown guy. Like, I'll wear someone else's gloves. But I know he had a great time in South Carolina. Then we go to June 6th, Alex, and it's only 12 days ago. But we already mentioned Zion Giles and Keenan Britt. Those are kids that have been committed for a little while, but shortly – actually, I think it was on the visit. Aiden Harris and Andrew Harris committed to South Carolina, and that's something we knew was in the works. So that was a lot of fun to watch. Message boards, and we're never going to ruin a kid's moment. But it was very interesting to watch that. Quarterback Landon Duckworth. He did his OV June 6th, went to Auburn this past weekend. Still not sure if that was a 7-on-7 camp, unofficial visit. I know that Auburn either way gave him a lot of love.
Yeah, it was just an unofficial visit. I don't think his team was there for a 7-on-7 camp, but obviously, news is starting to get out today that he's coming back to South Carolina this weekend for an unofficial visit. So that's pretty key news there. Just because, for one, you just want for South Carolina, get him back on campus, but two, he's at the Elite 11 this week out in Los Angeles. Like, he's going to be there. I think the Elite 11 ends Thursday, so he's going to have to come, cross country to Columbia, South Carolina to be in for an official visit. And I think that shows there's a lot of interest there. And obviously, you can go on the Big Spur and read what he had to say about, kind of his recruitment yesterday at the Elite 11. I thought it was really interesting. So I think South Carolina, we've talked about a lot. They've done a really good job here, even after he committed to kind of stay in this fight that Mike Shula and Shane Beamer, I think, and those guys have him in a pretty good spot right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting because if you're on 24/7, whether you're a member of the Big Spur or any other site, we'd hope you're on the Big Spur. But he was ranked number 2 overall
Yeah.
yesterday from Elite 11. So really good prospect that Gamecock fans know all about. Defensive tackle Noah Clark. I feel confident the Gamecocks are in the top 2. He might have a top 3. But what's your take on Noah Clark? How open do you think he is to other schools, and is he finalizing things?
Yeah, just a quick note on him. He's going to be in for, I guess, technically an unofficial visit tomorrow. His team, his C.E. Jordan High School up in North Carolina, they're going to be in for a camp tomorrow. I don't think he's participating, but he's going to be in, I think, just to kind of hang out. And I think that's pretty big. Just,
I love.
Yeah, I can see it coming down to South Carolina, NC State for him. He's committing on July 2nd, and he's going to NC State this weekend. So I think, one of the things NC State's going to pitch is, how close to home for him they are, being that he's from Durham and that triangle area. They're right there. But South Carolina, has really worked this recruitment. Travian Robinson's done a really good job. And I think, they've made a pretty big impact and staying pretty well with him right now.
Yeah, I agree. Safety, Joel Combe. It's a guy that I know, Combe. I know that JC is pretty high on the kid. It has like kind of raw attributes. JC said as much on Inside the Gamecocks, the show, which you should be watching every day from 12 to 2. And don't forget Jamie and his smorgasbord of guests, and Alex is a part of the smorgasbord. But Jamie's on there from 10 to 12. I will actually be on Jamie's show Friday, 11 to 12, I think so. We're gonna talk basketball, but a lot of fun. You can see him and Mike. So Joel Combe, tell me a little about him. I haven't paid attention.
Yeah, so he's one that out of Kell High School in Marietta, Georgia. They've kind of got into the game here, and he's one that's kind of emerged lately in this recruitment process. He's was in obviously that June 6th weekend along with Koshi Barnes, who we'll talk about here in a second. But South Carolina's put themselves, I feel like I say it a lot for a lot of these guys, but they're in a pretty good spot for him, and just kind of continuing. I think to hold on to that momentum. He's going to Tennessee this weekend, so we keep an eye on that. But South Carolina's kind of been one of his top schools, I think, here recently, and they put themselves in a good spot heading to that July 9th commitment.
And the last kid we're going to talk about tonight is Koski Barnes. Koski Barnes. It's a bit, y'all. But, what's your take on that? Is South Carolina pushing?
Yeah, I think so. He's one that just fits exactly what they're looking for at that corner spot. A guy that's 6'3", really big, tall, long arm. Just fits exactly what Torian Gray looks for in those cornerbacks. And he's going to Kentucky this weekend for an official visit. But, again, I think South Carolina's in a good spot, and we'll see. Obviously, we'll see with some of these guys. I think he's making a midsummer commitment, and that's kind of something with a lot of their guys on their recruiting board right now. You think about where that class stands right now with the guys they've already got committed. A lot of their top targets and the targets that we've talked about on this show really want to decide either maybe in July or sometime before their senior season. So it could be a really interesting July on the recruiting board for South Carolina.
I agree. I do want to get to Maddox one more time here. Sequel Patterson, all eyes on him for wide receiver. I think he's probably clearly South Carolina's number 1 target at wide receiver. But Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, he's one that I think even when he reclassified, South Carolina has been right there. Mike Furry's done a pretty good job of doing building that relationship with Sequel Patterson, and we'll see kind of where this recruitment goes. But South Carolina's right there for him.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about all these kids we talked about, and look, this was. My hat is off to you. My hat is off, Alex. You can see my bald head. My hat is tipped to you because we just went through a number of players, and Alex has the 411 on every single one of them. Make sure you're on thebigspur.com. Alex, I mean, just off the top of your head, of the maybe 20 kids, 25 kids we just talked about, most of those guys are 4 and 5 stars. So just remember, it is not easy to recruit those guys, but I remember 2 years ago when I started this show, this guy's not ranked, but the coaching staff really likes him. And at the time, I told everyone, just because the player is not ranked, especially DBs, trust Torian Gray. And that turned into DQ Smith and Nicky Memwari. I mean,
those 2 defensive backs that we just talked about are 2 key, players, or kind of fit that mold perfectly. I think Combe is one that really interested to watch his senior year. He can continue to rise in rankings based on even the schools who are coming after him and he's visited. Same thing with Koshi Barnes. I think he's just kind of flown under the radar. But I've said it a few times, like with Torian Gray, like the guys that he kind of zero in on, like end up being really good when you give him a year or two at South Carolina. Look at Judge Collier, who they identified early and got on. All these other guys. Vakari Swain. Vakari Swain was, he was a pretty highly ranked guy, but they know what they're looking for at those defensive backs, kind of cornerback spots, and do a really good job there.
Well, even Vakari started as a 3-star and then got to a 4-star at the end. So, yeah. Gamecocks are swinging their sword for all these players, and they're all highly rated. And as JC mentioned the other day, and other folks mention all the time, the blue chip ratio, South Carolina's over 50%. And if they get, a handful or so of these guys, in addition to the guys that are committed, South Carolina's in a really good spot. And that's really exciting for Gamecock fans. One more time before we get out of here. If you're in the Columbia area, if you're close, come out to CB18, 4 to 8 p.m. It's going to be a lot of fun on Saturday. Look, I never win door prizes, so if you just show up, you have a better chance than me to win a door prize, which will be a lot of fun. And it's so much fun interacting with these folks, and you can talk to Ashley. She is so down to earth. She is the sweetest human being in the world. But come out and support us or support the softball team. And that's where all the money's going. And then you're going to see a lot of student athletes and other coaches there. And it's your opportunity to get pictures, shake hands. I'm sure there'll be some NIL stuff there. I think that, I know Lenore Sellers will be there. And there's a couple other players that'll be there as well from the football side and then basketball, baseball, all that. But Alex, with that being said, I better see you on Saturday because I haven't seen you since March Madness in person.
I'll do what I can. We'll see what I can do.
All right. Well, we're going to get out of here. As always, we thank you so much for joining us tonight. We thank you so much for giving us your time. It's the most valuable thing you have. And we will be back, assuming programming is going on next week on Wednesday night. And we'll watch Colin Murray Boyles walk across that stage and shake Adam Silver's hand. So for me, for Alex, wish you all the best. Have a great week.